Tonight we're going back to a time before emojis, before dial-up modems, and way before someone decided it was a good idea to send voice notes instead of texts. Imagine waking up in the dusty heat of ancient Mesopotamia. No phone in your pocket, no mailbox at the end of the street. Instead, the fastest way to send a message across miles. You'd carve it into a chunk of clay and hand it off to someone on foot. If you were lucky, they didn't eat lunch with the enemy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Drop your location and the local hour in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the warm silt beside the Tigris River, squinting under the pale morning sun. People shout in Akkadian, pulling carts filled with jars and wool, but no one's in a rush. That's the thing about early civilizations, everything takes time. Messages can take days, even weeks, to reach neighboring cities. So when someone finally realizes that a bird might be faster than a man, it's like inventing 5G. You're standing in a courtyard watching a young boy tie a papyrus note to the leg of a surprisingly calm pigeon. The bird flaps, pauses, and then whooshes up into the sky like it knows exactly where it's going. That bird isn't lost, it's homing. The ancient Sumerians were some of the first to write things down, but it's the Assyrians and later the Persians who start thinking, what if messages didn't have to walk? Pigeons, it turns out, are ridiculously good at finding their way home. Even if you've blindfolded them. Even if you've taken them hundreds of miles away. Kind of like when your phone still connects to your Wi-Fi from 4 apartments down. There's a half-baked legend about an early ruler, probably apocryphal, who noticed a pigeon flying directly back to its roost day after day and thought, what if I tie this tax receipt to its leg? Not romantic, but practical. And maybe, just maybe, that's how birdmail was born. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamians actually used pigeons for official messaging this early, or if it came later with the Egyptians and Persians. The evidence is feathery at best. But what's certain is that pigeons had a unique place in ancient culture. They weren't just soup ingredients, they were sacred symbols of peace, fertility, and eventually, logistics. You sit beneath a palm tree as someone hands you a tablet to deliver to another city. It's heavy, awkward, and brittle. You look over at the coop of pigeons across the yard. They look smug, like they know they're about to make you obsolete. Pigeons aren't just dumb sky chickens. They can recognize faces, navigate using Earth's magnetic field, and remember routes like a GPS with wings. They're so committed to going home that if you try to release one from your roof, it'll just circle and land again like, bro, I'm already here. And while the first true pigeon posts wouldn't emerge until Persia, the seeds are here, in the dusty breath of early civilization. People begin experimenting. A merchant here, a priest there. One ties a note to a bird and sends it to a nearby farm. It works. Sort of. The note gets there, but the bird stays. Turns out, pigeons are good at going home, not at taking round trips. You quickly learn that you can only send a message from a place the pigeon doesn't live back to where it does. So now you're the weird guy who travels around with a flock of birds. You have to take them with you on the cart, in a covered crate, carefully feeding them millet while dodging potholes and bandits. You become a kind of early Bluetooth system, needing line of sight and a prepared bird. It's ridiculous, and it works. Somewhere out there, another you is sitting in a town square, staring into the sky, waiting. And when that tiny grey blur appears against the clouds, landing gracefully on a rooftop, he knows a message has arrived. Maybe it's good news, grain shipment incoming. Maybe it's bad, cousin got eaten by a crocodile. Either way, it beat the messenger by 2 days. There's a quirky Babylonian story, likely more myth than memo, about a man who trained pigeons to bring him love notes from a woman across the river. They couldn't meet in person, thanks to a disapproving father. So he sent her messages daily, one tiny scroll at a time, inked on thin bark or linen, tied lovingly to the ankle of a bird. Her replies came back with gossip, perfume, and once, a single figure. Whether the story is real or just ancient fanfic, it proves something important. People have always wanted to text. Of course, it's not all romance and rainbows. Pigeon Post had a dark side. Lose a bird, and you lose the message. And once word gets out that birds carry information, suddenly they're targets. You see it happen one day, some kid with a sling takes out a pigeon mid-air. The message never arrives. The consequences ripple. Someone doesn't get warned. Someone else loses a shipment. A very expensive chain reaction caused by one rock and a bit of bad aim. Still, pigeon messaging starts to catch on. Quietly. Informally. The nobles don't fully trust it yet, too risky, too weird. But merchants love it. Farmers, too. They start training birds themselves, swapping tips at markets. Rub a little oil on the wings, one says. They'll fly faster. Totally false. But still. The enthusiasm is there. So here you are, hunched over a wooden perch, stroking the feathers of your most trusted pigeon. You've named her Hasha. She's faster than the others, smarter too. And you swear she gives you side eye when you're late feeding her. You hold out a grain of barley. She hops onto your wrist. You tie the note, your first serious message, and let her fly. You don't breathe until she's out of sight. Tonight, you're not in the age of smartphones. You're in a world where messages have wings. And for now, pigeons are about to soar into history. You squint beneath your hood, eyes tracing the dry, craggy horizon of ancient Persia. Dust clings to your boots, the sun hammers down like a judge with no lunch break, and your tunic smells like something that once lived in it. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings, 3 short tones. That's your signal. You duck behind a sun-bleached stone wall, crack open your leather satchel, and check your cargo. 4 pigeons. All calm. All staring at you with those unsettling marble eyes that say, "You forgot the snacks again, didn't you?" Welcome to the Persian Empire, where Cyrus the Great isn't just conquering territory, he's reinventing communication. You've been drafted into an early, experimental bird-based courier network. And while it's not quite FedEx, it's faster than a guy on a donkey yelling urgent through bandit-infested roads. Historians still argue whether Cyrus truly pioneered Pigeon Post at this scale or whether he simply formalized what merchants had already been doing for years. Either way, what you're part of is unlike anything the world has seen, a message relay system that stretches over 1,500 miles, from Sardis to Susa, like a giant dusty telegraph made of hooves and feathers. Your job is risky. You carry not just messages, but trust. And in an empire as vast as this one, trust is a currency more valuable than silver. Governors need updates, generals want instructions, and someone at court is probably demanding a pigeon be sent to fetch their left sandal from the spa. You never ask questions, you just tie the scroll to the bird's leg and let it go. Your pigeon, Darius, yes, you've named him after the king, because he's dramatic and doesn't fly well in the rain, takes off with a flick of your wrist. His wings slice the air. You watch until he's a speck. Then nothing. Silence. You hope he makes it. Some couriers swear by a trick. They whisper to the birds before release. A little spell, a phrase of encouragement. You tried that once. The bird bit your lip. Now you just nod solemnly like you're saluting a tiny sky soldier. The truth is, Persia was the perfect place for pigeons to shine. The terrain was unforgiving, mountains, deserts, scorching plains. Even the most hardened riders could take days to get from one satrapy to another. But a pigeon, it could cross 300 miles in a day, coasting on thermal currents and sheer bird rage. The Persians had already built the royal road, a 1,700-mile superhighway for messengers. But pigeons? They didn't need roads. Just sky. You climb onto a rocky outcrop overlooking the royal stables. Below, a small structure stands out, a square wooden coop, surrounded by guards. It's not for horses, it's for the imperial pigeons. Each is tagged with a tiny clay ring inscribed in cuneiform, noting where it came from. They're rotated and trained regularly, paired to cities, temples, even battlefields. There's an old rumor among the couriers that one pigeon once flew from Babylon to Ecbatana in under a day, carrying a single message that changed the outcome of a siege. Whether that's true or just bird propaganda, nobody knows, but you repeat the story anyway because it makes your job sound more dramatic. Now, quirky fact time. Some nobles try to cheat the system. They bribe pigeon trainers to divert messages or intercept rival birds. One shady governor even tried to paint over his neighbors' pigeons to confuse them into nesting elsewhere. It worked, until the birds started crashing into palace walls like confused feathery darts. Still, no one can deny how game-changing pigeons are. While most folks in the empire are still relying on smoke signals or desperately hoping some guy on a camel doesn't get lost, the elite have feathered couriers flitting from tower to tower, cloaked in secrecy and speed. Of course, only the powerful have the resources to train and house these pigeons. That's the dark irony. You need a lot of time, money, and space to use the free sky. You step into a cool stone hall, the scent of incense masking the sweat and feathers. A scribe hands you a fresh scroll, thin parchment, sealed with a wax crest. You recognize the symbol. It's from the treasury. That means money talk. You gently roll it and secure it to the leg of your calmest bird, Rook. He looks bored. You envy that. As you release him, you imagine what that message contains. Tax reform? Gold shipment approval? Or maybe, just maybe, a coded warning about an impending rebellion. Because in ancient Persia, information isn't just power, it's survival. And the people who move it fastest live the longest. Rook flaps away, wings flashing silver in the midday sun. You lean back and wipe your brow. That's one more delivery made. One more secret flown through the air. Historians still debate just how widespread pigeon communication truly was in the Achaemenid era. Some say it was a rare novelty. Others insist it formed the invisible skeleton of Persian control. The evidence is fragmented, just like your back after carrying a pigeon crate up 5 flights of palace stairs. But you've seen enough to believe. When a general gets a message mid-campaign and changes course before the enemy even knows he's coming, that's not luck. That's wings. Later that night, you sit by a fire in a rocky gully, a loaf of old barley bread in one hand and a pigeon perched on your knee, pecking gently at your belt because he's convinced that's where the treats live. You stare up at the stars, thinking about the thousands of other messages sailing over your head right now, some bearing orders, some sending love, some just reminding someone to feed the goats. You never get to read the messages. That's the rule. But you do get to wonder. And in a world that's still young, still clumsy with the idea of nations and borders, there's something almost magical about sending a thought, just a sentence or two, into the sky and trusting that it will land exactly where it needs to. Pigeons don't speak. They don't ask questions. They just fly home. And for now, that's enough to change the world. The wind shifts as you walk through the bustling harbor of Alexandria. You dodge a man unloading amphorae of olive oil, sidestep a goat with no sense of personal space, and nearly collide with a fishmonger who's yelling at a pelican. It's loud, chaotic, and smells like salted everything. But high above this fragrant circus, something quieter happens. A pigeon zips across the sky, invisible to most, essential to a few. You glance up and catch a flash of wing dark against the pale stone of the lighthouse. That bird isn't sightseeing. It's on a mission. And you, lucky you, are about to learn just how deep Egypt's ties with pigeons go. By the time Cleopatra's eyeliner becomes fashion goals and the Library of Alexandria is full of scrolls that no one has time to read, pigeons have graduated from novelty to necessity. The Egyptians take what the Persians dabbled in and give it flair. You don't just send a message, you stage it. Birds launch from temple roofs, from military outposts, from balconies of sun-drenched villas that overlook the Nile. And yes, historians still argue whether pigeon post was formally institutionalized by the pharaohs or if it remained the domain of merchants and military types. But one thing is clear, the birds had a job. And like many workers in Egypt, they didn't get to unionize. As you enter a small courtyard, a priest motions you forward. He's got the look of a man who hasn't smiled since Ramses II was in kindergarten. Behind him, a sleek dovecot stands tall, painted with sacred symbols, each bird blessed in the name of Thoth, god of knowledge. You're here to help train a new set of pigeons, all raised on temple grounds. Apparently, holy birds deliver holy messages. You resist the urge to ask if that means the messages get express delivery. Your hands shake slightly as you pick up one of the pigeons. It's bigger than you expected, muscular, calm, staring right into your soul like it's judging your haircut. You tie a strip of papyrus to its leg. Not a royal command this time, but a weather report. Apparently, a dust storm is on the way, and a merchant upriver needs to get his barley under shelter before it's sand-flavored. You whisper something encouraging, because even in Egypt, old habits die hard, and release the bird. It lifts into the hot air with a flurry of feathers, circles once, then darts out of sight like a grey arrow. Now, quirky fact for the day, Egyptian nobles loved their pigeons so much that some were buried with them. Yep. They mummified them. In tiny linen wrappings, no less. Somewhere in a dark tomb, there's a sarcophagus filled with ancient tweet history. Archaeologists still debate whether these birds were beloved pets or elite messengers on permanent standby in the afterlife. Back on the ground, pigeons become the messengers of war. Egyptian generals begin to use them to relay movements, resource updates, and commands without relying on runners who, let's be honest, tend to either get lost or stabbed. With birds, you can send news from the battlefield to the palace in hours, not days. This changes everything. The military develops its own system, color-coded leg tags, specific landing stations, even trained handlers who double as scribes. If you're a general and your pigeon doesn't return, you know something's wrong. It's like that moment when your group chat goes suspiciously quiet. Never a good sign. One scholar you overhear, beard like a broom, voice like sandpaper, says pigeons helped win the Battle of Pelusium. Not by fighting, obviously, tiny helmets are a logistical nightmare, but by keeping the Egyptian high command one step ahead of the invading Persians. Of course, historians still debate whether that's a romanticized story or actual feathered warfare logistics. Either way, it makes for excellent bedtime drama. Meanwhile, in the city, pigeon posts are starting to go semi-public. A wealthy merchant named Bashamath has set up a rooftop station for paid messages. You climb up to see it. Rows of birds in compartments, each assigned to a specific city. Customers queue with notes, pay a small fee, and poof, a message sails off into the horizon. There's even a little clay receipt you can keep, like a tiny ancient proof of postage. It's brilliant. Bashamath makes a fortune. Other merchants follow suit. You see new coops being built near the harbor, near temples, even on top of bakeries. Those birds are suspiciously plump. You suspect bribes in the form of breadcrumbs. But of course, as soon as something becomes valuable, someone tries to ruin it. Soon, pigeon theft becomes a thing. People start stealing rival birds, intercepting messages, even forging return birds to reroute messages back to them. One guy even paints his birds to mimic a competitor's flock, confusing the system for weeks. Honestly, It's the most elaborate game of feathery espionage since the goose who accidentally swallowed a papyrus tax record. The Egyptians try to tighten control. You hear whispers of a proposed pigeon code, a set of rules for handlers, penalties for interception, even bird-specific tattoos. It never really takes off, get it? But the intention is there: keep the skies safe. You spend your days rotating birds between cities, checking their feathers, reading beak cues like some avian therapist. Your nights. You're usually perched on a rooftop, eating dates and watching the last pigeon of the day coast in with one final note, always landing softly as the sun bleeds into the Nile. One evening, you find a message addressed not to a governor or merchant, but to you. Your name, scribbled awkwardly. Inside, a drawing. A tiny, hilarious cartoon of you being pecked by a whole flock. No signature. You laugh harder than you have in weeks. You never find out who sent it, but somehow, it makes all the grime and guano feel worth it. Because here, among papyrus scrolls and whispering reeds, pigeons have become more than messengers. They're memory keepers. Information gliders. The original text bubbles before red receipts ruined everything. So the next time someone calls a pigeon just a bird, remember, they carried love, war, jokes, and warnings. And in ancient Egypt, every flap of their wings helped shape an empire. You're standing on the stone ramparts of a sun-baked fortress overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. The year? Somewhere in the mid-Roman Republic. Your tunic's dusty, your boots are falling apart, and you've got the distinct feeling you're about to be asked to do something absolutely ridiculous involving birds. Again, you mutter as your commanding officer hands you a scroll and gestures toward the pigeon coop like it owes him money. You sigh, grab the scroll, and walk toward the birds with all the enthusiasm of a man about to clean a communal latrine. You've only been stationed here for 3 months, but already, you know, Rome is obsessed with control. Roads, borders, armies, taxes, and now, pigeons. By the time Julius Caesar starts giving monologues in tented war camps, Rome has discovered what the Persians and Egyptians already knew: birds don't wait in traffic. But Rome doesn't just copy ideas, they turn them into machines. You know this firsthand. Rome's pigeon posts are run like military operations. There's a command hierarchy for the birds. You've had to fill out a form just to swap a pigeon from weather duty to battle alert. There are quotas, training sessions, even a ranking system where the fastest birds are given little wreath stamps on their ledgers. It's adorable and disturbing in equal measure. This morning, you're assigned to send a message from Brundisium to a supply depot outside Rome. It's not a long flight, but the message is critical. It details troop movement and grain stock levels, and you've been told very explicitly not to mess it up. You reach into the coop and select Flavius, a grey veteran with a reputation for making the flight in under 2 hours. He's got that no-nonsense look pigeons get when they've seen things. You gently tie the scroll to his leg, whisper something you hope sounds motivating, and release him into the Roman sky. He vanishes with all the grace of a marble bust falling off a shelf. Now, mainstream history tells us that Julius Caesar famously used pigeons during his Gallic Wars. And not just for sending messages between camps, some say he even used pigeons to send coded messages back to Rome itself, bypassing land routes that could be sabotaged or blocked. There's that story, probably exaggerated, about a pigeon that flew from Gaul to Rome in under a day, warning the Senate of a surprise attack. Historians still argue whether that message changed Roman military strategy, or if it was just pigeon fan fiction. Quirky fact of the day: Romans were so impressed with pigeon intelligence that some philosophers, like Pliny the Elder, wrote weirdly poetic essays about them. He swore pigeons could recognize faces, hold grudges, and even feel shame. Shame. Imagine being a pigeon and having Pliny write about your emotional depth in Latin. Somewhere in history, there's a pigeon blushing in marble. But this pigeon obsession wasn't just military. Rome's merchant class quickly realized that pigeons were faster than galleys for sending price updates between coastal cities. Imagine, you're a spice trader in Sicily and you need to let your cousin in Ostia know that pepper is up 3 denarii per sack. You could send a boat, or you could tie a message to a bird and let it yeet itself across the sky. No bribes, no pirates, no weather delays. Rome's shipping economy quietly transformed thanks to pigeons. Suddenly, supply chains tightened, prices stabilized, and smugglers had a tougher time creating artificial shortages. Information moved faster than lies. Well, some lies. Still, there's an open scholarly debate about just how formalized the Roman pigeon post really was. Some argue it remained mostly in military and merchant hands, never reaching the level of a true state-run institution. Others point to scattered Roman laws about aviary theft and claim those are clear signs of a semi-public network. You don't care. All you know is, you've got blisters on your hands and bird poop on your cloak. Now, the downside to being Rome's newest pigeon boy? You're the one who has to clean the imperial dovecot every morning. And there are rules. Pigeons must be rotated, fed a specific seed blend, imported from Gaul, naturally, and inspected for emotional fatigue, whatever that means. You once tried to sneak in a nap during your shift and were woken up by an angry bird sitting directly on your face like judgment with feathers. But over time, something strange happens. You start to respect them. The pigeons, that is. They don't complain, they don't hesitate, and they never forget their way home. In a world where maps are vague and most people get lost trying to find their sandals, that's impressive. One day, you overhear a senator boasting about a pigeon that brought him news of a distant victory before his rivals. He won a bet, gained prestige, and bought the pigeon a tiny silver ankle bracelet. That bird now has better jewelry than you. You start noticing elite homes in Rome with personal rooftop coops. Some are strictly for business, others, whispers say, are for love letters. That senator's daughter. Yeah, her pigeons carry verses from local poets too cowardly to speak aloud. Apparently, one particularly passionate bird accidentally delivered a sonnet to the wrong balcony and started a minor neighborhood feud. The bird was not charged, but the poet had to leave town. You become faster with your hands, smoother with the scroll ties. Your birds start recognizing your voice. Flavius even starts hopping onto your shoulder without prompting. You tell him things sometimes, complaints, jokes, even secrets. He never tells a soul. You trust him more than most of your commanding officers. That's the quiet brilliance of the Roman pigeon system. It's invisible but indispensable. While legions march and roads stretch across continents, it's the birds who keep the rhythm of empire. Troop orders, grain movements, Senate politics, they all flutter through the air, unnoticed by most. Until one day, everything changes. The fortress receives a message from the north. Urgent. Disturbing. A border skirmish has turned into a full revolt. Troops are mobilizing. You're handed 5 birds, 5 scrolls, and 5 destinations. You don't have time to be afraid. You work quickly, efficiently, releasing bird after bird into the burning orange sky. You watch each one vanish into the horizon, heart pounding. If even one gets through, the response might come in time. If they don't, that night, you lie awake on your cot, staring at the ceiling. Flavius is asleep in his perch. You whisper a thank you anyway, just in case. Because out there, somewhere between chaos and order, your messages are flying. Carried by wings. By instinct. By trust. And if that isn't the beginning of modern communication, you're not sure what is. You're jolted awake by the distant clang of bells and the unmistakable smell of something burning, probably goat stew, but it could also be the perimeter. You groggily swing your legs off the cot, already bracing for another day of crisis. Welcome to Byzantium, where the walls are tall, the politics are messy, and yes, the pigeons are still working harder than half the nobility. As you step into the morning fog, you find yourself wondering, how did pigeons survive the Roman collapse when so many cities, systems, and emperors didn't? Maybe it's because they don't need roads. Or because they can't be bribed. Or maybe because pigeons never try to conquer Gaul while completely underestimating German tribes. By the time Constantinople rises as the new Roman heart, pigeons are already baked into the Byzantine fabric. The emperors might change, and the maps might twist like noodles, but these little grey diplomats remain constant, like taxes, sandals, and philosophical debates that never go anywhere. Your job now? You're stationed at the rooftop pigeon tower of the Magnora Palace, the imperial administrative complex. Which sounds glamorous, until you realize it's mostly scrolls, squawking, and someone named Eustratius who always forgets to refill the seed trays. Today, your task is urgent. Deliver word of an approaching naval threat from the Bulgars to a garrison stationed at the Black Sea coast. You've got 3 birds, 2 copies of the same message, and 1 bird you don't entirely trust because it once landed mid-flight to flirt with a seagull. Still, the system is solid. The Byzantines, inheriting Rome's paranoia and Egypt's rituals, treat pigeon messaging like sacred science. One mainstream fact: Emperor Justinian II famously used pigeons to send coded directives to his generals. His network was so reliable that scholars believe it shortened campaign times and may have helped him suppress revolts before they could snowball into full-blown coups. Though of course, historians still debate whether Justinian's bird operations were centralized state intelligence or just glorified hobby farms run by overzealous bureaucrats. You've seen both theories printed, sometimes in the same dusty scroll. Now, here's your quirky tidbit for the day. The Byzantine elite were known to host avian contests, yes, actual pigeon races with bets, garlands, and tiny embroidered cloaks for the winners. One emperor reportedly awarded land to a champion pigeon's owner. Another insisted his bird wear a gold ring for morale. You suspect the birds were more into millet than medals. Anyway, back to the mission. You carefully attach the first scroll to your fastest pigeon, a sleek blue-feathered veteran you've nicknamed Theodora, and launch her into the morning haze. She spirals once, finds her heading, and vanishes. 1 down. You tie the duplicate to another bird chunkier, but reliable, and send him off too. The third, you keep in reserve. You've learned the hard way that redundancy is the soul of pigeon strategy. While you wait, you wander the palace corridors. Byzantine bureaucracy is a lot. Dozens of departments. Endless red tape. Fancy titles like Logothete of the Drome who, rumor has it, oversees imperial communications, including your pigeon tower. You've never met the guy, but you're pretty sure he's the one who keeps sending passive-aggressive notes about coop cleanliness. Signed with wax, of course. Very imperial. But beneath the glittering mosaics and gilded ceilings, there's paranoia. Messages are intercepted. Birds are shot mid-air by enemy archers. Some regions even breed hawks just to take down imperial pigeons. It's the Dark Ages version of hacking someone's inbox. To protect against this, Byzantine handlers begin experimenting with false messages, decoy birds, and coded scripts using obscure dialects. The original pigeon encrypted VPN. You overhear a scribe muttering about a plan to tattoo tiny sigils onto pigeon legs, magical wards against interception. It's part superstition, part state security. Welcome to Byzantium, where theology, espionage, and birds collide in ways no one fully understands. Back in the tower, a new scroll arrives, delivered not by one of yours, but from the garrison you just contacted. It reads simply, received. Fortifying defenses. Praise Saint Demetrios. You exhale. The pigeons did it again. You start thinking about how this all works, not just the birds, but the people. The unseen army of handlers, scribes, coop keepers, coders, and runners who keep this system breathing. Every message that zips through the sky carries not just news, but hours of human effort. It's like a relay race where no one gets credit except the pigeon. At dinner, you're invited to a small feast thrown by a mid-level diplomat whose pigeon won one of those absurd races. You're not sure if he's serious when he toasts the bird with a chalice of honeyed wine, but you raise your cup anyway. Across the room, the pigeon in question sits on a pillow, looking mildly embarrassed. Later that night, under a sky full of stars and chimney smoke, you stand by the coop and gently stroke the feathers of your third bird, the backup you didn't use. His beady eyes meet yours in the flickering torchlight. Somewhere beyond the hills, the messages you sent have shaped the Empire's next move. And no one even saw it happen. That's the magic, isn't it? In a city where voices echo off marble domes and secrets travel faster than sandals can run, it's still the pigeons who carry the weight. They don't ask for pay. They don't need applause. They just come home. So you whisper a thank you. You toss a few extra seeds into the tray. And as you lie back on the stone ledge and let the city's lullaby of distant waves and clattering carts drift over you, you realize something. Pigeons aren't just messengers. They're the pulse. You wake to the sounds of a market already shouting at full volume, vendors yelling about fish, children chasing geese, a goat that is definitely not supposed to be in that bread stall. It's a new century, and you're far from Byzantium now. This is the dusty, dazzling world of the early Islamic caliphates, where scholarship, trade, and yes, pigeons, have all found fertile new ground. You rub your eyes, pull on your robe, and climb to the rooftop aviary that's rapidly becoming one of the busiest in Baghdad. The city below is a shimmering mosaic of domes, minarets, and spice-laden chaos. But from your perch, it's the sky that matters, the constant rush of wings, the flurry of feathers, the air thick with messages in motion. The Islamic Golden Age isn't just about poetry and algebra, it's also the boom era for pigeon post systems. As you stretch and sip a surprisingly good date-sweetened tea, your boss strides up the stairs. He's smiling, which is suspicious. "You're going to Basra," he says. "The birds need a new routing station. And someone needs to train the handlers." You stare at him, mid-sip. It's either that, or you help catalogue Ibn al-Jahiz's treatise on flatulence in animals. You're already packing. Mainstream history confirms what your back already knows. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, communication networks were a serious business. And pigeons? They were the wireless infrastructure. The caliphs invested heavily in pigeon posts stretching from Baghdad to Cairo, Damascus, and even as far as India. These birds were used for everything from military reports to merchant rate updates to, believe it or not, birth announcements. The most elite birds were kept in state-run aviaries, cared for like precious artifacts. You've heard tales of birds fed on saffron-infused seeds and washed with rosewater. Honestly, you'd settle for someone else cleaning the coop for once. Here's your quirky tidbit for this leg of the journey. Some court physicians believed that a pigeon's navigation skills were linked to its connection to the divine. That they could sense God's compass. A little poetic, a little absurd, but when you've watched a bird return from hundreds of miles away, it's hard not to feel like something mystical is going on. By the time you reach Basra, a sun-drenched, salt-sprayed port city with too many cats, you've memorized every protocol in the Kitab al-Bird, Book of the Pigeon. It's unofficial, but every bird handler in the Caliphate swears by it. Training methods, flight patterns, even a chapter on pigeon temperament. You make a note to cross-reference it with your own observations. You suspect Ibn al-Bird was exaggerating when he said pigeons respond best to oud music. Your new station is modest, a rooftop with a good view of the docks, a few reed-walled rooms, and one enthusiastic teen assistant named Sami who keeps naming the birds after warriors from 1001 Nights. You let it slide. Better than the last assistant who tried to teach pigeons to sneak. Birds don't sneak, they dive bomb. Training begins immediately. You establish flight paths to Baghdad, Damascus, and Kufa. Birds are tested daily. Messages are swapped, decoys introduced, weather patterns logged. You even try a test run across the desert, risky, but successful. The pigeon comes back with sand in its feathers and an expression of mild betrayal. By now, you've developed a kind of sixth sense about the birds. You can tell if one's off course just by the angle of its glide. You know when a storm's coming based on how the coop shifts its mood. And yes, you've started talking to them. They're good listeners. Better than most city officials. Then comes the night that changes everything. You're awoken by pounding on your door. It's Sami, out of breath and wide-eyed. There's a fire in the records office. You sprint across town, robe flapping, sandals slapping the cobblestones. Flames are licking the sky. You see officials scrambling to evacuate documents, tax scrolls, trade permits, royal letters. Someone screams, "We'll lose the whole registry." Without thinking, you shove a crate of pigeons into Sami's arms. Take these. Fly to Baghdad. Use Route 7. Code 3. But the wind. Go. He vanishes into the smoke. You grab 2 more crates and head for the roof. Birds flutter in panic. You whisper, soothe, bind scrolls, release. Over and over. Each one an arc of hope vanishing into the night. 3 hours later, the fire is contained. Half the records are gone. But by morning, replies start arriving from Baghdad. We have your census files. Tax rolls secured. Trade manifests preserved. You don't say much. You just sit on the roof, soot on your face, watching your pigeons come home one by one. Some are singed. One is limping. But they made it. Word spreads. The Caliph sends an envoy. You're handed a gold-embroidered robe, a purse of dinars, and a scroll of commendation declaring your service a blessing to the House of Wisdom. You keep the robe in a drawer. But the purse? You use that to build a second station in Kufa. And you double the bird feed budget. Historians still debate whether the Abbasid pigeon networks were more efficient than the mounted couriers of the same period. Some argue horses had speed, but birds had consistency. Others claim pigeons were unreliable in high heat or during sandstorms. You don't join the debate. You know what you've seen. You've seen messages save lives. You've seen birds defy death. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen God's compass fluttering through the sky. The sea air is thicker here, clinging to your tunic and curling your hair. You're in Venice now, somewhere between Renaissance brilliance and organized chaos. The canals glisten with morning light, gondoliers hum to themselves, and someone nearby is loudly arguing over cheese prices. In the distance, bells toll from San Marco Basilica, echoing across the water like a reminder that time doesn't stop, not even for pigeons. You lean against a crumbling balcony, tossing a crust of bread to a particularly plump bird eyeing you with suspicion. You've seen thinner pigeons. Then again, you've never met a Venetian baker who undersalted a loaf. You're not just on vacation. You've been hired by the Venetian state, yes, the actual government, to assess the health of its growing pigeon fleet. Because this isn't just the era of paintings and plague masks. This is the golden age of merchant empires. And when it comes to commerce, timing is everything. Here's your mainstream fact. Venice developed one of the most advanced commercial intelligence networks in Europe, and pigeons were central to it. Merchants used them to transmit market prices from distant ports. Imagine knowing the going rate for pepper in Alexandria before the ship even docks. That's insider trading, 14th century style. You're stationed at the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, a bustling trading house where German merchants haggle beside local spice dealers, all of them desperate to be the first to know what cargo is inbound. On the rooftop, coops are stacked like crates of wine, each tagged with routes, Rhodes, Crete, Constantinople. The birds come in fast, messages tied with wax thread, feathers flecked with salt. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some Venetian birds were trained not just for destination return, but pattern response, like flying in a small loop when a ship was spotted, or circling the Rialto Tower when bringing urgent news. They became early maritime signal systems, avian semaphore, if you will. You test it out. One bird named Viola, a diva with a glare like a nun's ruler, is trained to circle twice before landing when her message contains market intel. She does it once. You offer her raisins. She does it again. You give her a sardine. Is this science? No. But it's close enough for Venice. Now, of course, historians still debate whether Venetian pigeon use was widespread or elite-driven. Some argue it was limited to major merchant families. Others say even small traders pooled coin to fund shared pigeon posts. Either way, you know one thing. Pigeons in Venice don't just fly, they negotiate. One day, you're called into a shadowy corner of a wine cellar beneath the Doge's palace. Two masked men, likely information brokers, possibly professional eavesdroppers, show you a pigeon with jet black feathers and a strange scroll case welded to its leg. It's not Venetian. It's Genos. Espionage. The Republic of Genoa, Venice's trade rival, has been sending birds into Venetian airspace. Spies with wings. And someone, probably a noble with too much wine and not enough discretion, has been feeding them. You're asked to intercept one. It becomes a whole thing. You start baiting rooftops with decoy feed. You log every bird that lands. You train one of your own pigeons, nicknamed Giotto because he has a lazy eye, to follow any Genos pigeon home. One afternoon, Giotto returns with a piece of thread tied to his foot and a note that simply says, "Nice try." The pigeons are now spying on each other. Meanwhile, the traders grow increasingly reliant on your birds. A ship en route from Beirut sends a pigeon with advance notice of a rare indigo shipment. The message arrives days before the cargo, and the merchant who receives it corners the dye market overnight. He throws a feast in your honor. You try to make conversation, but everyone just wants to meet the pigeon. You carry her in a little basket. And now there's talk, rumors that other Italian city-states want to recruit pigeon experts. Florence is experimenting. Milan has built new aviaries. Even the Papal States are investing in what they're calling celestial couriering, because of course they are. You send letters back to friends in Baghdad and Constantinople. One replies, "Told you pigeons would outlive empires." You can't argue. Your work expands. You oversee a new messaging route from Venice to Ravenna. You experiment with scent markers and feather dyeing to distinguish routes. You publish a short treatise on pigeon nutrition, insisting that coastal birds require less salt. No one reads it, but you feel important. Then, one evening, while watching the birds swirl over the Grand Canal, you witness something unusual, a formation. Not a flock, but a pattern. 5 birds moving in a deliberate arc, returning to the same rooftop, again and again. You investigate. Turns out, it's a signal. The birds are trained to circle a target twice, then return. A visual code used by smugglers to signal a safe drop point. You admire the ingenuity. You also send an anonymous report to the Doge's office. You don't like your pigeons being involved in crime, no matter how elegant it looks. Later, you're gifted a ring inscribed with a tiny pigeon in flight. A thank you from a grateful merchant. You wear it proudly, until someone tries to steal it. After that, it goes into your sock drawer. You leave Venice years later, your hair grayer, your gait slower. But your pigeons, They're still flying. Still delivering. Still slipping through the cracks of history with secrets tied to their legs. And as your gondola glides into the misty lagoon, you look up and smile. Viola is circling. Twice. She never did like retirement. You wake up in the chill of an alpine morning, wool blanket tangled around your legs, the sound of distant hooves clattering along a cobblestone road. You're in Switzerland now, or maybe just over the border, depending on who's arguing about jurisdiction this week. The Alps loom in every direction, majestic and mildly threatening, like old librarians who demand silence. Outside your wooden inn, a courier gallops past, cloak flapping, face red from cold and urgency. A scroll is strapped to his back. You sip your barley coffee and shake your head. Poor guy's still doing it the old-fashioned way. Not you. You've been invited here by the House of Rothschild. Yes, that Rothschild family. Because while most people associate them with banking, they also happen to be some of the most enthusiastic pigeon pushers in 18th and 19th century Europe. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Rothschilds used a private network of homing pigeons to send market and financial data across Europe faster than anyone else. Before the telegraph, pigeons were the fastest way to move money, information about money, which is arguably even more valuable. The Rothschild sons, stationed across major European cities, London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, Naples, built a near-invisible network of bird routes. And their secret advantage? Birds trained for specific, fast corridors across the Alps, dodging blizzards, bandits, and the occasional overly patriotic goose. The story goes that after the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Nathan Rothschild in London received early word of Napoleon's defeat via pigeon, days before the British government even knew. He allegedly used this intel to manipulate the stock market, buying low and selling high before anyone else caught on. Historians still argue whether this legend is true, exaggerated, or complete financial fan fiction. Some claim it's propaganda spread by jealous rivals. Others insist there's archival proof in old Rothschild letters. But what's undeniable is that pigeons were flying in and out of Rothschild offices faster than most messengers on horseback could saddle up. You're stationed now in Lucerne, where you're helping optimize the Alpine Dash, a critical pigeon leg between Geneva and Milan. The challenge isn't just distance, it's altitude. Flying over the Alps is no joke. The air gets thin, the wind's unpredictable, and there's a real chance of being intercepted by hawks or, strangely, overzealous priests who think pigeons are devil messengers. You try several strategies. You lighten the bird payloads, stripping scrolls down to essential digits. You test feeding regimens, hemp seed boosts endurance, safflower makes them peppy, sometimes too peppy. You even try warming the birds before flight by placing them in wool-lined baskets. They like it. One refuses to leave and fluffs up like a smug feathered scone. Your assistant, Klaus, is a farmer's son with enormous hands and an uncanny ability to mimic pigeon coos. He insists on naming each bird after obscure cheeses. This one's Emmentaler. And that's Limburger. Don't sniff him. You attempt to be serious. But then Klaus straps tiny goggles to a bird named Gruyere for wind protection, and you give up. At least the birds don't seem to mind. Here's your quirky tidbit. Wealthy European families began throwing pigeon parties, where birds would be released carrying poetry, stock tips, or even matchmaking proposals. One particularly scandalous noblewoman sent a pigeon with the note, "Meet me behind the hedge after supper. Wear your good boots." The bird returned with a feather stuck to a lipstick mark. No one knows what happened. But someone definitely wore boots. Back to business. Your birds are flying faster now, skimming the treetops, dipping over icy cliffs with impressive confidence. You start logging delivery times and tracking patterns. Milan to Geneva drops from 36 hours, by courier, to under 8, by bird. It's revolutionary. Soon, you're pulled into a Rothschild meeting in a heavily curtained salon. There's tea. There's tension. One of the brothers is waving a French newspaper and saying something about Prussian grain speculation. Another mutters about leaked interest rates. You sit quietly until they turn to you. How quickly can you get us Frankfurt's figures? You smile, rub pigeon dust off your sleeve, and say, 5 hours. If Emmentaler's feeling generous. They laugh. Then pause. Are you serious? You are. Later that week, you're overseeing what becomes your most ambitious stunt yet, a relay route with 3 pigeon handoffs, carrying encrypted stock price changes from Vienna to Paris. You encode the numbers using a simple cipher, roll the note tight, and watch the first bird vanish into the clouds. Hours later, you're in Paris when the final bird arrives. You check the numbers. Dead accurate. You exhale and sit back. That, you realize, is the sound of the future arriving early. The Rothschilds are thrilled. They offer you a ridiculous sum to manage pigeon routing full-time. You politely decline. You've seen enough velvet waistcoats to last a lifetime. But before you leave, they give you a token of appreciation, a silver ring engraved with a tiny bird in mid-flight. You wear it next to your Venetian one. Your fingers are starting to look like a very niche jewelry display. As your carriage rumbles away from Lucerne, you look back one last time. Klaus is waving. Gruyere is perched on his head, looking imperious. And you think, of all the cities, of all the birds, these mountain messengers might be the boldest. They don't just fly. They climb the sky. The air smells like horse sweat and ambition. You're in New York City now, dusty, grimy, booming with energy in the mid-1800s. Cobblestone streets rattle under carriage wheels, children shout in Irish, Yiddish, and half-formed English, and every third man seems to be yelling about stocks. You dodge one of them on your way into the office of the Associated Press. Yes, that Associated Press. Back when newspapers were the heart of information, and when being the first to print a headline could make or break a publisher, pigeons were still quietly ruling the skies. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 1840s, before the telegraph connected all major cities, AP and other press agencies used homing pigeons to bridge communication gaps between Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. 4 years, those birds were the invisible force behind early journalism. You work in a cramped office above a printing press, where the floor vibrates from clunky machines, the windows are permanently open, for bird access, and everyone smokes cigars like they're getting paid in lung disease. There's a coop on the roof, and that coop. It's more important than half the reporters here. Each pigeon carries short, sharp bursts of news, stock figures, headline events, political rumors. The birds are faster than trains, faster than carriages, and, most importantly, independent of weather delays and derailed locomotives. It's information sovereignty, with feathers. You climb the rickety stairs to the rooftop, where you meet Ellis, the pigeon handler and part-time philosopher. He's wiry, sun-tanned, and always smells faintly of coffee and birdseed. He greets you with, "These birds know more about Wall Street than anyone working it." He's not wrong. Here's your quirky tidbit. One pigeon, affectionately nicknamed Ticker, once flew from Albany to Manhattan carrying a single word, crash. No explanation, no numbers, just the ominous bombshell. Reporters scrambled to decode it. Editors panicked. By the time the full story arrived, Ticker was already roosting and demanding cracked corn. You spend days learning Ellis's routines, how he feeds a mixture of peas and corn, checks wing health, reads feather color for stress. He has a tiny harness rigged up with compartments for multiple messages. 1 bird, 3 cities, 5 breaking stories. Ellis calls it the gossip belt. You even try training a new bird yourself, a scrappy grey flyer with a crooked tail. You name him Bronx, because he's fast, noisy, and hard to control. Bronx doesn't just fly, he dive bombs like a feathered cannonball. The first time he returns with a message from Philadelphia, you give him a peanut. He pecks your thumbnail instead. Love hurts. Meanwhile, tensions building in the city. News agencies are competing fiercely, and everyone's suspicious. Your neighbor at the next desk gets accused of pigeon theft. You find feathers in your drawer that you didn't put there. Someone swears they saw a bird being bribed with honey-roasted sunflower seeds. And then comes the telegraph. Its wires creep along rooftops like steel ivy, connecting cities with a speed pigeons can't match. One line opens between Boston and New York, and just like that, the birds are suddenly outdated. Or so people think. But here's the thing, the telegraph isn't perfect. It goes down in storms, it costs a fortune per word, and not every city is wired yet. There are blind spots. And pigeons. They don't care about wires or weather or bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether AP completely phased out pigeons or quietly kept them as a backup well into the telegraph era. Some records suggest shadow coops were maintained for emergencies. Others believe pigeons were retired and turned into eccentric pets. There's even a rumor of one editor who refused to read any news not delivered by bird. He lasted 6 months. You're still experimenting. One night, you try sending a full story, a 200-word news report tied across 2 pigeons. It works, mostly. One arrives early, and the copy editor has to guess the ending. They go with, and then, unexpectedly, the mayor kissed the goat. Sales spike. You don't correct it. You spend your evenings on the roof with Ellis, watching the skyline grow teeth, steel, stone, and steam. He tells you he's planning to retire, maybe raise chickens. You're not sure that's an upgrade. Bronx lands beside you one night with a message marked urgent. You unroll it, expecting numbers, death, scandal. It says, ice cream truck stuck on Broadway. Kids revolting. You laugh harder than you should. The next morning, Ellis is gone. Leaves you a note that simply says, keep them flying. And under it, in pencil, a list of his favorite birds. Bronx is circled. Twice. You inherit the rooftop coop. Reporters call you the bird guy now, even though you're technically senior staff. You don't mind. Your pigeons don't either. They just keep arriving, still faster than some trains, still indifferent to progress. Years pass. The telegraph gets faster. Phones begin to whisper across cities. But pigeons don't disappear. They retreat quietly into hobbyists' sheds, military camps, and the hearts of those who know a good messenger doesn't need a plug. And sometimes, when the wires go down in a storm and the presses go quiet, you send Bronx out one more time. Just to see if he's still got it. He always does. You're deep in the chaos of World War I now, mud on your boots, the air thick with gunpowder and cold breath, and the relentless thud of artillery echoing somewhere too close for comfort. The trenches stretch endlessly like muddy veins across France, and above them, not just bullets. Pigeons. Yes, pigeons. You duck into a dugout, and the first thing you see isn't a soldier, it's a pigeon handler. He's cradling a bird like it's a newborn, whispering to it, adjusting a tiny canister on its leg with more care than a surgeon. Welcome to the war's strangest, quietest heroes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During World War I, homing pigeons were essential to military communication. Over 100,000 were used by various forces, delivering messages when radios failed, wires were cut, or troops were stranded. The British had an entire division for pigeon warfare. The Americans. They built mobile pigeon lofts, essentially trucks with bird condos in the back. Even the French got poetic about it, calling their pigeons les messages silence you. You're assigned to one of these mobile lofts now, rattling through cratered roads behind the front lines. Your birds are prepped like paratroopers, rested, fed, feathers groomed. One, named Biscuit, wears a small leather harness like he's going to a pigeon gala. Another, Ruthless, has 3 confirmed message deliveries under shell fire. You don't ask questions. You just salute. You're given a mission: train a squadron of pigeons for deep frontline extraction. Translation: when troops get pinned down with no way to communicate, your birds will be the last hope. No pressure. You start by introducing the birds to gunfire, gradually. At first, they panic. Biscuit nearly headbutts a wall. But with patience and steady hands, they adapt. Some even seem to get cocky. One, a scruffy bird with one eye, starts flying toward the sound of explosions. You name him Boomstick. Now for your quirky tidbit: some soldiers believed pigeons had supernatural instincts. One regiment swore a bird named Albert could sense incoming attacks, fluttering wildly seconds before a shell dropped. He earned the nickname Feathered Prophet. Whether it was luck, sound vibration, or just a bird reacting to anxiety, well, historians still argue whether pigeons could anticipate battlefield conditions based on subtle environmental cues. One day, it happens. A battalion is trapped in the Argonne forest. Radios are jammed, runners are shot, and hope is evaporating. You're handed a note, scribbled in pencil and desperation: surrounded. Running low on food. Ammo down to 12%. Request air support and rations. Coordinates attached. You pick Ruthless. You strap the message in, give him a crumb of biscuit, and whisper, "Fly fast, little chaos magnet." He launches into grey sky, dodging tree limbs, flak bursts, and enemy fire. Time slows. You wait. 2 hours later, command receives the message. Air support is dispatched. Supplies dropped. That battalion? They make it out. Ruthless returns, wings nicked, eyes wild but alive. He gets a medal. A real one. And an entire biscuit. Word spreads, and soon you're being asked to help train other divisions. You travel between camps, sleeping next to birds instead of people, your pockets full of birdseed, smelling permanently like dry corn and hope. Here's something else you learn: pigeons can remember up to 25 different home locations. So you start programming them like living GPS systems. One to base, one to forward unit, one to the mobile hospital. You get creative with routing. One bird, one war zone, infinite possibility. But war's not just bullets, it's mud, rain, gas, fear. You lose birds. Some never return. Others are found days later, dazed, missing feathers. Boomstick disappears for a week and comes back dragging part of a German helmet. No explanation. Historians still argue whether pigeons made the decisive difference in key battles. But the British War Office said it clearly: no means of communication is more certain or safe than the pigeon. The Germans agree, by the way. They even try training hawks to intercept Allied pigeons. It doesn't go well. Pigeons are sneakier than they look. You're eventually sent to HQ to consult on a long-range project. Pigeons trained to deliver messages over 100 miles. It's risky. Birds tire. Winds shift. Predators circle. But it works more than once. You begin to believe that somewhere deep in every pigeon is the soul of a messenger who just refuses to quit. One night, you're back in the trenches. Rain pouring. Soldiers joking nervously about ghosts and trench foot. A new recruit sits beside you, wide-eyed. "Are the pigeons really that good?" he asks. You point to Biscuit, who's calmly preening despite the chaos. "That bird's saved more lives than most generals," you say. And then comes the whisper: ceasefire talks. Maybe the end of the war. When it finally happens, when the guns go quiet, you release the last bird with one simple word: peace. It's not a military message. It's just a gesture. The bird soars upward, wings slicing the sunrise, flying into a world that suddenly feels a little less broken. You stay behind to help demobilize the birds. Some are adopted. Some retired. A few disappear into the skies like they've had enough of humans. And as you sit there, with Ruthless perched on your shoulder and Boomstick trying to eat your bootlace, you realize something. These messengers may never speak, but they've carried our words, our hopes, and sometimes, our salvation. One feather at a time. You're standing in a small military museum now, somewhere in the English countryside, with creaky wooden floors and that faintly musty smell of preserved uniforms, old paper, and gentle ghosts. There's a quiet hum from the fluorescent lights above, and in front of you, behind glass and dust, is a medal. Not just any medal. It's the Pigeon medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. And it was awarded to a pigeon. His name? Cher Amy. And he's not just a war hero. He's a legend. Let's rewind the clock a little. October 1918. The forests of the Meuse-Argonne region in France. The 77th Infantry Division of the US Army, known as the Lost Battalion, is trapped behind enemy lines. Friendly artillery doesn't know they're there and begins shelling them. Radios? Useless. Messengers? All captured or killed. So they turn to pigeons. They send out several birds. Most are shot down. Finally, they tie a message to the leg of their last hope, a battered, one-eyed, shot-in-the-wing pigeon named Cher Amy. The message is frantic and clear. We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Cher Amy flew over 25 miles in just under 25 minutes, wounded, under fire, with a shattered leg and a bullet through the breast. But he made it. The shelling stopped. The battalion was saved. Over 190 men lived. And yes, he received the French Croix de Guerre and the Pigeon medal, and his body was taxidermied and displayed in the Smithsonian. Which is probably the weirdest retirement plan ever. Hero one day, museum exhibit the next. You lean closer to the case and squint at the tiny metal canister they used to carry messages. It's not much bigger than your thumb. Just enough space for one desperate note. Somehow, that tiny tube carried the weight of 190 lives. Now for your quirky tidbit. The original message Cher Amy carried is still legible. And it includes a little smudge of what experts believe was pigeon blood. It's a detail you really didn't need, but it adds a certain dramatic flair, doesn't it? You walk through more of the exhibit. There are medals awarded to other birds too, like G.I. Joe, a British-trained pigeon who saved over 1,000 lives in World War II by stopping a bombing mission just in time. Or Paddy, the Irish pigeon who delivered the first coded message back to Allied command on D-Day in under 5 hours. And then there's Commando. Yes, Commando. A British pigeon who completed over 90 missions into Nazi-occupied France and always came back. Honestly, he deserves his own action movie. Probably with dramatic slow-motion takeoffs. The museum has a wall labeled PDSA Roll of Honor, a tribute to animal bravery. And yes, over 30 pigeons are listed there. Some delivered messages across enemy territory. Others flew in blackout conditions. One even navigated through poison gas. Historians still argue whether animals like Cher Amy were uniquely gifted or simply lucky survivors in a numbers game. After all, for every pigeon hero, there were dozens that didn't make it back. Some scholars argue that these stories, while heartwarming, overshadow the mechanical advancements happening at the same time, like encrypted radios and portable transceivers. But you know what? Machines don't have loyalty. They don't fight through gunfire with a broken wing and a note tied to their leg. Machines don't get medals, get names, or have children write school reports about them. You wander into a smaller side room where there's a short video playing on loop. It shows grainy footage, black and white, jerky movements of soldiers releasing pigeons into the air from trenches, submarines, even airplanes. The narrator, in that vintage British monotone, says, "Trusted to reach their destination when all else failed. Loyal, tireless, and swift." And right next to the screen, a guest book. You flip it open and skim the entries. Didn't know pigeons were this cool. Cher Amy is my new favorite war hero. My granddad used to raise racing pigeons. Now I get why he loved them. Cried at the video. Thank you, birds. Why is there no Netflix series about this? You nod at that last one. Honestly, it's overdue. You step outside the museum into the cool air, and the sky's full of grey clouds that seem to stretch all the way back to France. A bird flutters past, just an ordinary pigeon. No medals. No headlines. But something about the way it cuts through the air makes you pause. You imagine, for just a second, that it's carrying something. A message. Not just paper, but purpose. You remember the glass case. The broken leg. The saved battalion. You remember that one tiny word in Cher Amy's message, please. And in that moment, you get it. Why we honored them. Why we told stories about them. Why pigeons weren't just birds during war, they were messengers. They were hope with wings. You walk back toward the village, the museum's silhouette fading behind you. Somewhere overhead, a pigeon flaps away from a rooftop, as if it still has somewhere urgent to be. You're in a cramped New York City apartment now, 1930s, smoky air, clattering typewriters, and the faint hum of a radio playing jazz somewhere down the hallway. You're sitting at a small kitchen table, flipping through a newspaper, when your eyes catch a strange headline wedged between a baseball score and a cigarette ad, "Pigeons join the police force." Wait, what? You blink. Yep. There it is. The NYPD, in all their early 20th century wisdom, have decided to start using pigeons to communicate across the boroughs. And no, this isn't satire. It's just New York being New York. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Between the World Wars, several major police forces, including New York's, seriously experimented with using homing pigeons for urban communication. The NYPD went so far as to establish pigeon lofts on precinct rooftops in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Officers would attach messages to the birds and send them between stations, faster than patrolmen on bikes, more reliable than telephones during a blackout. You're now wearing a beat cop's uniform, chewing on the end of a pencil, and staring at a pigeon named Louis who's refusing to fly until you offer him part of your sandwich. He's clearly unionized. Louis eventually flaps off across the skyline, wings flashing in the afternoon sun, dodging water towers and laundry lines. You watch him disappear past the Empire State Building like a feathery telegram. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Pigeons didn't just work for the cops, they were also used by gangsters. Yes, really. Rumors spread through the 1930s and 40s of organized crime families using rooftop coops to send messages that couldn't be tapped, traced, or bugged. Cops would arrest mobsters and find pigeons hidden in coat closets. In one infamous case, 2 rival gang pigeons ended up brawling on a fire escape. True crime, Bird Edition. Historians still argue whether these underground bird networks were actually efficient or just romanticized lore like speakeasy passwords and violin cases full of Tommy guns. But one thing's certain, pigeons were everywhere, fluttering above a city trying to modernize. You shift forward a few decades. It's 1945. You're sitting in the Pentagon, newly constructed, full of suits and cigarette smoke and men whispering about communism. The army has just decommissioned thousands of war pigeons, but some generals are hesitant. Radios are improving, sure. Encryption is better. But pigeons, well, pigeons never get hacked. There's a brief moment in US military history when they actually consider keeping a permanent pigeon corps just in case. Imagine that budget proposal: $3 million for birdseed and tiny helmets. You're now part of a tiny experimental unit that tests pigeons against radio transmission in emergency situations. It's like a Cold War Olympics. Bird versus antenna. And, surprise, sometimes the pigeons win. In blackout conditions, during storm interference, across unpredictable terrain, the birds are consistently birdier. And then, just when you think pigeons have peaked, enter Project Sea Hunt. Yes, that's a real thing. In the 1970s, the US Navy trained pigeons to help with search and rescue missions. Here's how it worked. Pigeons were taught to peck a button when they spotted an orange life vest in the ocean. They were placed in clear-domed compartments under helicopters and could visually scan massive swaths of sea faster than any human. Testing showed pigeons had a higher success rate than radar. You're now in a Navy chopper, hovering over the Pacific. Below, endless blue. Next to you, a pigeon named Radar. He pecks furiously at his little button. You peer out the window, and sure enough, there's a tiny orange blip on the waves. Someone's life just got a second chance. Of course, this sparks another round of debate. Historians still argue whether the pigeon's visual system is superior due to a wider field of view or just better pattern recognition. Whatever the reason, they've got something we don't. Maybe it's humility, or the ability to poop while flying. You return to civilian life now. It's the 1980s. Pigeons have faded from the spotlight. Computers are rising. Phones are shrinking. The internet is blinking to life in basements and universities. But somewhere in a dusty military archive, a file labeled Avian Communications Unit still sits, unshredded, quietly defying obsolescence. Meanwhile, a few eccentric hobbyists keep the flame alive. Amateur pigeon racers, backyard breeders, retired veterans who raise birds not for war, but for memory. One guy in Ohio claims his great-grandfather's pigeon saved a general. He holds reunions in his backyard for other bird lovers. They drink lemonade, swap stories, and wear hats shaped like pigeons. You quietly make a note to visit someday. Even in the cities, pigeons remain perched on statues, waddling through parks, completely unaware of their once glorious resumes. Most people see them as vermin now. Flying rats. Poop machines. But you see something else. You know about Louis the NYPD bird. About the mob pigeons. About Sea Hunt, and the gang pigeon duel, and the soldiers whose last hope had feathers. You pause by a pigeon on the subway platform. He's pecking a cigarette, but like it owes him money. He looks rough, New York rough. But in another timeline, he'd be wearing a medal. In another life, he was a hero. You nod at him. He blinks back, unimpressed. The train roars past, and he doesn't flinch. You're standing at a tech conference now, somewhere in California, glass walls, espresso bars, and people wearing hoodies that cost more than rent. Giant screens flash buzzwords: AI, blockchain, quantum, neural. You half expect a robot dog to come skittering past. But tucked away at the back of the showroom, past all the noise, is a quiet little booth. No VR headsets. No holograms. Just an old wooden coupe and a banner that reads, "The original wireless messaging system, Pigeons." And yeah, you're drawn to it. Behind the table stands a wiry old guy in a windbreaker and cargo pants, holding a pigeon like it's a priceless artifact. "This here," he says with a grin, "doesn't need a password. Doesn't get hacked. Doesn't lose signal in a tunnel. And it comes with wings." Let's begin with your mainstream historical fact. Even as satellite communication was booming in the late 20th century, countries like Switzerland, India, and parts of China kept Pigeon core operational well into the 1980s and 90s. Why? Because in extreme conditions, earthquakes, floods, war zones, birds still sometimes outperformed machines. India's police force in the Odisha region kept a working Pigeon core until 2006. That's not ancient history. That's after the invention of Facebook. While you were poking people online, Indian officers were literally sending out feathery memos. You raise an eyebrow. But isn't that outdated? The windbreaker guy chuckles. So's handwriting. Doesn't mean it's worthless. You nod slowly. Because here's your quirky tidbit. In 2010, a South African IT company held a competition uploading a large file over the internet versus sending it via Pigeon. The bird won. No, seriously. The file took over 2 hours to upload. The Pigeon flew 60 miles with a USB stick strapped to its leg and still beat the data. Historians still argue whether this was a publicity stunt or a genuine critique of rural internet infrastructure. Either way, it's weirdly comforting to know that sometimes, even in the digital age, nature still throws a winged middle feather at modern tech. You wander away from the booth, the old man giving you a tiny wave. He's surrounded by a few wide-eyed kids who think pigeons are Pokemon or something. And maybe they kind of are, half-forgotten creatures with secret powers. As the years tick forward, pigeons become more myth than method. No one's really using them for messages anymore, at least not seriously. They survive more as symbols now. Icons of persistence, of adaptability, of communication that doesn't require a battery. But now and then, one still makes the news. A pigeon crosses borders and sparks an international incident. In 2016, Indian authorities detained a bird suspected of spying for Pakistan. They X-rayed it, analyzed its feather patterns, and kept it in a holding cell. You're not making this up. Even more recently, rumors popped up about pigeons carrying tiny, high-res cameras strapped to their bellies. The idea? A silent, nearly invisible surveillance drone, only it's not a drone. It's a living, flying legacy system. And you think to yourself, how strange that something so old school keeps sneaking its way back into the future. You're scrolling your phone now, maybe from a cafe in Istanbul or a park bench in Rome, and you see a viral clip, someone strapping a micro GPS to a pigeon and tracking its journey across continents. It's mesmerizing. The bird moves over mountains, dodges storms, takes a rest on a cargo ship, then keeps going. The top comment reads, "This bird has better travel stats than me." The next one says, "Messenger pigeons were the original airdrop." And someone replies, "No cap. This bird's got bars." Because, of course, the internet always finds a way to meme the miraculous. But here's what sticks with you: these birds still do it. Not because they have to. Not because they're being paid or programmed or prodded. They just know how. They remember. Across centuries, across wars, across cities and satellites and silicon, they remember the route home. And now, thanks to hobbyists, trackers, and the occasional eccentric billionaire who gets obsessed with bird-based cryptography, yeah, that happened, pigeons are having a tiny renaissance. You start seeing more lofts on rooftops, more coops in backyards, more kids entering pigeon races. Some futurists even begin wondering if these birds could help us when the grid finally goes down. EMP-proof communication, they call it. No signal, no problem. Just tape a note to Larry the pigeon and hope he skips the fast food drive-thru. Historians still debate whether this is a blip of nostalgia or the beginning of a genuine low-tech resurgence. Whether pigeons have a place in the post-digital toolkit, or we're just projecting meaning onto a species that used to do our dirty work. But the answer doesn't really matter. Because even now, in an age of fiber optic cables and space lasers, a small part of you finds peace in the idea that somewhere out there, A bird is cutting through the sky with a message, just like always. No app. No algorithm. Just wings. And maybe that's the point. You sit back in your chair, close your eyes, and for just a moment, the city noise fades. You can almost hear it, the soft flap of feathers, the whisper of wind, and the beat of something ancient gliding just above the skyline. The past isn't gone. It's airborne. You're perched now, not unlike a pigeon, on a rooftop somewhere in Paris. The sun is melting into the horizon, smearing gold across slate rooftops. A church bell tolls. Somewhere below, someone's making dinner. Garlic and butter and maybe just a hint of wine hit your nose like a warm memory. And across from you, a pigeon. Not just any pigeon, mind you. A grandchild of the legendary Cher Amy. Well, probably not literally, pigeon genealogies aren't exactly airtight, but still. He's got that look. Broad chest. Fierce eyes. That "don't mess with me" strut. You're here because this is one of the last cities in the world where pigeon posts were treated like sacred tradition long after the rest of the world unplugged them. France officially disbanded its military pigeon unit in 2001. That's right, 2001. Britney Spears was already on her second album by the time the last French war pigeon was honorably discharged. That's your mainstream historical fact. The French kept the tradition alive longer than almost anyone else, partly out of nostalgia, partly because of their intense respect for resilience. And also, possibly, because the French just love a good rebellion, and what's more rebellious than flying over bureaucracy with a note tied to your leg? But here comes the quirky tidbit. The fortress of Mont Valérien, a 19th century military site near Paris, maintained an active pigeon messaging center until the very end. It even included tiny pigeon elevators. You heard that right. Elevators. For pigeons. So the birds could reach their rooftop loft without flapping through maze-like staircases. You'd think they'd just fly, but hey, why flap when you can ride in style? You sneak a peek into that historical loft now. Dust clings to wooden beams. Rows of nesting cubbies are still there, some padded with feathers that must be decades old. On the walls, tiny shelves once stacked with message capsules, maps, and bird-size military tags. There's even a framed photograph of a decorated pigeon receiving a medal. The bird looks entirely unimpressed. Historians still argue whether the French military actually needed these birds into the 21st century, or whether the whole thing was more symbolic, a respectful nod to the animals that had served through 2 world wars. Either way, the decision to finally retire them came with full ceremony. A flag. A trumpet. Possibly a cheese plate. You glance at the modern skyline behind the old fortress. Cell towers blink. Drones buzz overhead. Tourists snap selfies with espresso cups and captions like "Bonjour, baby." And it strikes you, the pigeon's world is shrinking. Fewer places to nest. Fewer coops. Fewer humans who remember why these birds once mattered. But some still do. There's a museum in Belgium now dedicated to pigeon history. It's got war medals, vintage capsules, old photographs of birds in flight over bombed-out cities. Children come on field trips, wide-eyed and full of questions. Parents glance at the displays and murmur to each other, "I had no idea pigeons did all this." And maybe that's the saddest part, not that the birds are gone, but that the story is fading. You see, pigeons don't write their own legends. They carry ours. From Roman scrolls to battlefield SOS notes. From secret love letters to gangland drop points. From royal decrees to birthday messages sent across enemy lines. They never asked questions. They never demanded thanks. They just flew. You're walking now, through an old European square. There's a fountain at the center, surrounded by, what else? A small army of pigeons. Some peck at crumbs. One tries to bathe in a puddle the size of a coin. Another sits on the edge of a cafe chair like he's waiting for the waiter to bring him something. Most people pass them by without a second glance. But you remember. You know. You sit beside them, toss a piece of croissant their way, and they waddle closer. One tilts its head like it recognizes you. Or maybe it's just sizing you up. Either way, there's something comforting about it. Something enduring. You start to wonder, maybe we were never meant to forget them completely. Because in an age of instant everything, of push notifications and viral trends that vanish faster than they appeared, there's something deeply human about the long, quiet patience of a pigeon in flight. About trusting a message to wings. About waiting, not refreshing. Somewhere in a drawer, in an attic, maybe even in a museum basement, there are still message capsules. Tiny scrolls of inked paper. Names, coordinates, pleas, confessions. The echoes of 1,000 stories once too fragile for radio waves. You realize then, pigeons were never just messengers. They were our witnesses. The silent, feathered bystanders to revolutions and goodbyes and secret dreams whispered onto slips of paper. They crossed enemy lines, dodged bullets, braved storms, and never asked for anything more than a place to land. And now, in the stillness of this square, as twilight deepens and cafe lights flicker on one by one, you watch them huddle together, wing to wing. The same way they have for millennia. You don't need a photo. You won't tweet about it. You'll just sit a little longer. Watching. Remembering. Because someone has to. The world quiets down as you settle in for one final leg of the journey. You've been through ancient deserts, war-torn skies, hidden lofts, and ridiculous competitions between USB pigeons and rural broadband. Now, here you are on a train cutting through a misty countryside. Maybe it's England. Maybe it's somewhere in the Alps. Doesn't matter. The scenery blurs like watercolor outside your window. And overhead, pacing along the fluorescent lights, a pigeon. It must have gotten in at the last station. Or maybe it's been riding for days, like a weary commuter who's had enough of flight and just wants to kick back in coach. You stare at it, and it stares back. And you both kind of get it. Because you've followed this bird's legacy across time and continents, and now, at the end of all these tales, you're starting to realize something. Pigeons weren't just a quaint footnote in history. They were a mirror. One that reflects how we've changed the way we trust, the way we speak, and the way we wait. In the earliest days, communication was sacred. Slow. Personal. A message was something you tied carefully to a bird's leg, whispered into wings, and hoped would make it to the other side. Today, you rage when a text takes more than 2 seconds to deliver. You doom scroll, you multitask, you half listen while opening 5 tabs. Speed has replaced substance. But pigeons, they were all substance. And here's your final mainstream historical fact. In 2023, the Chinese military reportedly trained pigeons again as part of a backup communication system, yes, in case of cyber warfare or satellite failure. Birds. As a fallback plan. In a world of AI and drones, they're still hedging their bets with feathers. That's not nostalgia. That's pragmatism wrapped in wings. Quirky tidbit. In a German city just a few years ago, officials installed special pigeon lofts to encourage the birds to stay in controlled housing. Why? So they could collect the droppings, yes, for environmental study. People are now literally analyzing pigeon poop to monitor pollution and drug traces in the urban population. So, in a weird twist, pigeons are still messengers, just now delivering data from their butts. Historians still argue whether pigeons deserve more credit in school textbooks. Whether they were mere tools or full-blown war heroes. Whether the medals they earned were symbolic gestures or deserved military honors. But one thing no one debates anymore: they delivered. And in doing so, they became timeless. You're back on the street now. Any city, any country. Maybe it's early morning, fog curling around old buildings. Maybe it's late at night, with neon signs reflecting off puddles. But above, you catch a flicker of movement, a blur of grey wings, that familiar, lazy arc. You smile. You wonder who they're delivering for now. Maybe no one. Maybe they're just flying because that's what they were born to do. But in your mind, you imagine it anyway. A tiny scroll. A folded note. A last message. Something left unsaid. And that's the thing, isn't it? The pigeon never asks what's inside. Never peeks. Never doubts. It just flies. Straight, determined, unstoppable. No matter the storm. No matter the odds. No matter the chaos below. A final whisper rides the wind. I made it. And now, the story softens. You let the pace slow. The world around you dims. The sharp corners of memory begin to blur, the same way evening light melts across old stone and feathered rooftops. You can still hear wings, distantly, quiet now. Just the flutter of history sighing against the air. You breathe in through your nose, let it settle in your chest. It's heavier than you expected. Not with sadness, no. But with a kind of reverence. For the messages we send. For the ones we keep. And for the ancient couriers who never needed to understand the weight of our words to carry them anyway. Imagine now, a single bird gliding high above the city. A place where past and present coexist. Below, headlights crawl like fireflies. In the distance, the moon is rising. Still, quiet, full. The pigeon beats its wings. Not hurried. Not aimless. Just steady. There is peace in that rhythm. And maybe you feel it, too, deep in your ribs. The soft thud of your own heartbeat syncing with a history far older than wires or Wi-Fi. You are not just a listener tonight. You are the message. So drift now. Let your thoughts settle. Let the story dissolve into the hush of feathers and fading light. Somewhere, the pigeon lands. The message is delivered. And all is well.